So the question we're going to look at today and answer from Genesis is, who are you? So when you hear that question, or if I was to ask you, who are you, what would your answer be? What would your answer be, Shannon? Me? Okay. Yeah, maybe your name.
I'm a human.
You're human. Okay, that's good. It's just getting a little bit more like you're not a butterfly, right? That's the improvement. Yeah, so there's a few ways of answering this, and we'll go and try to answer it biblically. So it's a foundational question. I believe in Jason's first lesson, this is one of those questions that philosophy tries to answer. It's a common question that everybody has at some point in their life, and so we want to be able to answer it accurately. And really, what it's getting at is your identity. So when you hear the term your identity, what does that make you think of? What is your identity? Okay, yeah, that's a good one. So how do people know you? What are some maybe characteristics? Anything else comes to mind on that point? Your identity? What do you think, Lena? No, yeah, okay. Maybe I have an ID card, a driver's license, right? And that kind of tells a little bit about myself. But it's kind of how you answer the question, I am such and such. So I am a human is one answer to that. It also gets into a little bit of what your purpose in life is. Like, what do you live for? What do you care most about? And oftentimes it will give you a sense of security and safety. You've probably heard the term not going outside of your comfort zone, right? Not doing something you're not used to, or you don't feel like you're very good at. So like when you're sort of, your identity can be seen as a thing that makes you feel safe. Like when I'm this person, when I'm doing this, I feel comfortable. And the world gives you lots of options for defining yourself. So we looked at pluralism a few weeks back, and the idea that there are many different value systems, many different worldviews, and people can pick and choose. Well, the world has something similar for identity. It gives you lots of different ways that you can define yourself, and typically it comes down to you can just define yourself how you want to. You can be whatever you want to be. However you see yourself, that's equally valid to the next person. And what that leads to, though, is an identity crisis. People don't know how to define themselves. They can't find a purpose in their life. It's interesting in this day and age, in this culture, they can't even answer the question, what is a woman or what is a man? That's something that's very foundational to your identity, is your gender. And in this day and age, people that don't have a biblical worldview, that have a more secular worldview, struggle to even answer that basic question. And again, it comes down to being able to just define it however you want to. And then if you have an evolution worldview, well, I just showed the answer there, but if you have an evolutionist worldview, what does that sort of lead to? Like, what purpose do you get from evolution?
Nothing.
Yeah, nothing, right? Like you're just molecules crashing around. That doesn't give you an identity. It doesn't give you a purpose in life. And so you could say that evolution leads to nihilism, which just means life doesn't have a meaning, doesn't have a value or a purpose. And this causes, in many cases, depression and anxiety. And I think you see this more and more. You see this in young people more and more. And so part of the problem, there's potentially many problems there, but part of the problem is people just don't know how to identify these things. They're not going to the Bible for their worldview. And oftentimes the solution that's provided by the world is to simply build up your self-esteem. Try to tell you you're great, you're awesome, but it doesn't work. It doesn't typically have the effect that people are hoping. And we'll analyze that as well. And so to answer these questions, we want to go to the Bible. And something that's foundational for this church, for these lessons, is that we believe in the sufficiency of the scriptures. Can anybody tell me what that means? The sufficiency of the scriptures? Heard that before?
Well, what it says in the scriptures is enough for us to know about life.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's sufficient. It has answers for life and godliness. It has answers for what to believe about God, about the world. Does that mean it has answers for how to do your math problems. Not necessarily, right? But the scriptures even illuminates and tells us how to think about math and how we believe that because we have an orderly God, we can even have math and structure in the world. And so we believe in the sufficiency of scriptures, and certainly it answers the question of who you are and your identity. And so to look at that, we want to do a quick recap from what we've seen already in Genesis that'll help us as we look at some of the other passages here in Genesis 2. So first we saw that God created the world ex nihilo, out of nothing by his word. And this is in contrast to many of the other worldviews that see the universe as always being there or just coming about by random chance. But we believe that God created out of nothing. And he created in 6 normal days. They weren't ages. There wasn't a big gap. And the world he created was very good. He didn't create an evil world. Remember we walked through a little bit the Enuma Elish and another view from the ancient Near East about how the world was created, and they saw just sort of death and destruction was what caused the world and what caused the creation of humans. That's not the biblical worldview stands in opposition to that and sees that the world was created good. It was man that caused the fall and corruption. And then very important, there's a creator and creature distinction. So we're not the creator, we're separate, we're distinct. The creator is separate from his creation. At the same time, he's very intimate and involved with it and cares about it. And the Bible is history. It's telling a story, and really the greatest story ever told. But it's not just a legend or a myth, it's actual history. And we should read the Bible like a book in context as literature. So a lot of what we're doing, and the more you read the Bible, the more it'll make sense. But you want to go to it and read it carefully, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what exegesis is. And can somebody define for me again what exegesis means? Over here, maybe. Do you know it yet?
It's taking the words of the Bible and what it would actually mean.
Right. Yeah. So the X is out of. So bringing meaning out of what the words are saying, right? So they say something and how do you make sense of it? What does it actually mean? And that's contrasted to eisegesis, which is, what's eisegesis?
It's putting your own meaning to the text.
Right. Yeah. And it's very easy to do. It happens all the time. So you have to guard against that. Make sure you're trying to just understand what it actually says. And something we looked at previously were the toledotes. Does anybody remember where the term toledot comes from? What it means? No. So it just is a word for generations. And in Genesis, it has different formulas and sections. And those sections are marked out by the term, these are the generations or the toledotes of someone. And so it's helpful to see that and understand that structure because you want to look at those different sections and treat them like their own section, their own chapter in a book, essentially. And so last week, we saw, or last time that we were looking at Genesis, we saw that Genesis 1 through 2, 3. So remember the original authors, they didn't add the chapters and verses. Those were added years later by someone. They're not inspired. And so sometimes where they put those chapters and verses aren't the most helpful. And one of those cases is in Genesis 1 and 2. They should have ended the first chapter of Genesis at the end of verse 3 of chapter 2. That would have made a lot more sense because that's one section. And that section went over the 7 days or the 6 days of creation and the 7th day that God rested. And now we're going to look at Genesis 2. And what's going on in Genesis 2 is it's essentially a zoomed in view of day 6. So it's not really talking about the other days so much. It's really talking about the creation of humanity. And so that's why you see it gives a little bit more details, a little bit fuller picture of how God created man and woman, whereas in Genesis 1, it just kind of gives a summary of it. And so real quickly to understand how chapter 2 fits into the context, we'll look at the outline of the first toledot. So again, it begins in chapter 2, verse 4, these are the generations, or the totals of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that Yahweh God made earth and heaven. And so Genesis 2, we see the creation of mankind in paradise. We see the very abundant world that God created for man and that blessed man with. And then Genesis 3, you see the fall of mankind and how that paradise is lost. And then Genesis 4, you see the result of that fall with, what was the first murder? Who was the first? Yeah.
Cain, killing Abel.
Exactly, yeah. So you see the murder of Abel, and then the resulting death and corruption of the world. So this is the first Toledo. It's kind of a section that describes the fall of man and the result. So imagine reading a book without reading the first chapters. Who here is reading a fiction book at the moment? Yeah. What's the book are you reading? Can you tell me what the main problem in the book is, or what they're trying to overcome?
The leaders aren't leading very well, and they're trying to figure out a new leadership system.
Okay, great, yeah. So they're trying to figure out a new leadership system. And if you started midway through and you didn't understand that was a problem, it would be harder to know what's going on, right? In that book. That's true with any book, and it's true with the Bible as well. So you have to. This section is extremely important for even making sense of the rest of the Bible. It frames the rest of it, and so you see how in Genesis 3, paradise is lost, and really the rest of the Bible is how do we get back to that? How do we get back to heaven on earth, where God is dwelling with His people? And so that's where you get Israel, right? And now God is creating a new people for Himself, and promising them a land and blessing if they obey. And so it's in a sense a promise of a return to paradise. Of course, it fails, and then you have in the New Testament Christ being the ultimate solution for how man can be reconciled back to God. And so it's all sort of coming back to this, what happened in Genesis 3 about the fall. And so it's really important to understand this section. So we'll be looking at Genesis 2 today, creation of mankind, what their original purpose and goal was. And then the following week, next week, Jason will be going over marriage, which is a key part of Genesis 2. And then after that, we'll look at the fall and such. So just real quick, looking at Genesis 2, the paradise that God created. So 2:8, and Yahweh God planted a garden in Eden toward the east. There He placed the man whom He had formed. So God made man, and He placed him in this specific area, this specific geography called Eden. And out of the ground, Yahweh God caused to grow every tree that is desirable in appearance and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So you can see this original paradise. It was the things that were growing there were desirable in appearance. There was a beauty to it. So do you guys, anybody like going on hikes? Yeah. Okay, that's great. What do you like about hikes?
Wildlife.
Well, okay, you like seeing wildlife. That's great.
The views.
The views, yeah. Okay, that's great. Mhm.
The exercise.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. So there's a lot of good things. Like creation is a blessing from God, and so we can enjoy the beauty in nature and such, and also we can enjoy the gifts of food. So He made the trees there and the fruit and the food to be good, and there's the tree of life. So this paradise God made, the creation God made, was to be enjoyed by man. And there's a river that went out from the garden, so a river that gave life, and it became 4 rivers, and it kind of spread out to the rest of the world. And so you start seeing little hints that this paradise that man was over was to be a blessing to the rest of the world, and eventually to go out and take dominion of the rest of the world. And so this is the paradise God created man. So we'll look at now the creation of mankind. But I want to start with this question. should we view mankind and ourselves, so you as a person, as being lowly or exalted creatures? Another way of saying that is, are you great or are you worthless?
Worthless.
Worthless, okay. Anybody want to take the opposite position? Yeah, yeah. Why would you say that?
Because God made us.
God, okay. So would you kind of agree with that? That there's something good? Yeah. So Judah.
There's some charge of all the other creatures in the world.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. So you kind of see a little bit of both. So oftentimes our first reaction of worthless is because we're sinners, right? And that's true. And so that's not necessarily a bad reaction. And then, but also seeing that like actually God made us. There's some value and worth there. Both those things can be true. And so we want to view ourselves as God views us. And we see that in Genesis 2:7. So there, Yahweh, God, formed man. So the first thing you should see is that we are creatures. God made us. We didn't make ourselves. We don't get to determine ourselves, who we are. God made us. He defines us. He gets to decide who we are and what we're made for. And two things, though. One is he made us from the dust from the ground. So we're lowly made from the dust. Can anybody guess, if you were to take your makeup, like all the raw materials you're made of, so like, what do you know what you're mostly made of? What raw material?
Water.
Yep, water. So we're mostly made of water. So there's hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, all these raw materials. If you were to break them all up and figure out how valuable they are, how much you could buy those materials for, how valuable do you think it is? Zero? Actually, it's about $150 is the value. Yes. So is that about how valuable you are as a person? You're worth about $150. No. Well, in one sense, right, you're made from the dust, right? There's nothing that special about you in that sense. But why would you say that we're more valuable than $150? Kidding?
Because we have a soul and a life, and we have consciousness.
Yep. So God made us in His image with a soul, and you see that here where it says, "Breathe into His nostrils the breath of life." So the animals, they also are said to have the breath of life, but man is the only one where it's said that God breathed into his nostrils. So man, this is kind of the start of indicating how we have a soul. What is man's soul? Or maybe another way of saying man's spirit. What do you think, David?
You said what is man's spirit?
Yeah, man's spirit or man's soul.
I don't really understand.
Oh, okay, yeah, no worries. So man is made with both a material part of us, so there's our physical body, right? And there's also an immaterial part of us, our soul or our spirit. So there's two parts. And when somebody dies, we talk about death sometimes. Is death going out of existence? You just disappear. What is death then? Luke?
It's your eternal soul departing from your physical body.
Yeah. So right now when we're alive, those things are kind of joined together in a sense. With death, they're separated, right? So those two parts, the material and the immaterial, are separated at death. So we have both of those. So just as God is spirit, we have an element of immaterial spirit as well, and that's what makes us humans. It's also something that makes us different from other animals. So other animals are living beings, but we're living beings in a greater sense. And you kind of see this when Paul is speaking to Gentiles and he's trying to explain to them about God. He goes and the people he's talking to in this context are not Jews. They don't have a basic understanding of who they are. And so when he's talking to Jews, he emphasizes different things. But when he's talking to Gentiles, he mentions how, like, in God, that's we live and move and exist. The only thing that makes us important, the only thing that makes us have worth and value is our relation to God and how in Him we live and move and exist. We can't be persons outside of our connection to God. And so I want to kind of deal with, a little bit with those categories, deal with the question that sometimes comes up, is the issue of self-esteem. So we're going to look at this category, and as we look at it, we're also going to walk through how to deal with things like this, because there's a lot of secular categories like this. So what do you think about the answer to this question? Should we have a high or a low self-esteem? Caleb?
Low self-esteem.
Okay, how come? Oh, why so? Why do you think we should have a?
So that we don't get really prideful.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So high self-esteem is associated with pride, and it is prideful. And so I think we do have a right reaction to that a high self-esteem is not appropriate biblically. But we kind of want to dig into this a little bit more. And so just to define these two things. So high self-esteem says, I am the best, I'm amazing. A low self-esteem says, I am the worst. So that do you think most people feel one way or the other, or both? At different times. I think most people feel both at different times, right? This is kind of like just a normal, in some sense, a normal part of human experience, where there's times where you feel great about yourself, maybe you did something really good, and then maybe shortly after something happens, maybe there's an awkward moment, or you mess up, or there's some failure, and you just feel down about yourself. Like this is to some degree a normal part of human experience. I know I experience both at different times. And so what we want to understand about this, though, is that the Bible never uses this language, right? So these are secular categories that the culture uses in many different ways. And so I want to kind of teach you to be equipped on how to deal with them, because you're going to deal with this not just on this issue, but many, many issues. The world gives us many categories like this. And so the problem, and why you have to be careful with these kind of categories, is because they often immediately resonate. Because the world can be very good at making good observations. So it's true that people feel high and low self-esteem. The world observes that. People observe that. So when they start talking about it, you sort of may immediately resonate with it. It's like, yeah, I understand what low self-esteem is. I'm just feeling that right now. And then what they do is they give you solutions based on those observations that seem very straightforward and intuitive. So here's an example. So we've shown syllogisms in the past. We're going to show an example syllogism logic for how the world may use these categories. So first premise. So anyway, what's a premise? David?
Like a fact.
Yeah, so it's a fact. It's something you're taking to be true that you use logic to come to conclusions from. So first premise is people experience high and low self-esteem. Do you think that's true or false?
True.
It's true. Second premise, people feel happier when they have high self-esteem. You think that's true or false?
True.
It's true, right? Yeah. So here's a conclusion. So high self-esteem is good and low self-esteem is bad. And therefore we should try to build out people's self-esteem, give them a high self-esteem. So the two premises are true, and the conclusion seems pretty direct and straightforward. Okay, well, if people experience these categories and they're happy with high self-esteem, let's try to build them up, make them feel good about themselves. What do you think about that conclusion?
Well, it's assuming that it's most important for you to be happy.
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah, so there's certain premises kind of embedded in the argument that they don't bring forward. So oftentimes when you're analyzing an argument like this, you kind of want to figure out what those unstated premises are, and that could be one of them. And so what you see though is like the premises are true, but the conclusion doesn't necessarily follow from the premise, and that's almost always the issue when you deal with secular categories like this. Is the world will make true observations, but then their solution, their conclusion, is not right. It's not a biblical one. Sorry, you had your hand up.
Also, it's assuming that not being happy is bad.
Okay, yeah. So there could be some assumptions there. And actually, you know, our culture very much has a high value of being happy. There were other sort of worldviews and cultures. Even today, you see it every once in a while. They're called Stoics. Have you ever heard that term, Stoic? What does that kind of mean?
Strong.
What was that?
Kind of like strong or tough.
Yeah, so they feel like they're being stronger and tougher about life. And what sort of you kind of know their philosophy on life, Stoics? What's sort of your maybe impression of their attitude?
Emotionless.
Yeah, and so their mindset is, and I used to be a Stoic to some degree, but their mindset is like, you know what, if I just don't feel anything, I'll never get hurt, and I'll go through life, and it'll be a lot easier, better. If I just don't have emotions, and whatever comes, I just roll with it, right? So that's not necessarily, that's not a biblical worldview though. So sometimes maybe we resonate with it because it's sort of the opposite of this view of just building yourself up. But what we want to do is instead look at this from a biblical worldview. And again, Christians are going to be tempted. You'll be tempted to look at secular categories like this and integrate it with the Bible and with the biblical worldview. And what that leads to is eisegesis. You start reading it into the text. And so here's just some examples. So we believe that we're made in God's image. And so that's a great reason to feel good about yourself and have high self-esteem. Or you might say, you know, God, he wants me to be happy. And I'm happiest when I have high self-esteem. And people will go to different verses to try to promote this, that you should, the passage where it talks about love others as yourself. It's like, well, look, it's telling you to love yourself. It's like, no, that's not the point of the passage. It's actually telling you to love and think about others, not yourself. So they start reading these categories into the Bible. And again, it's very easy to do. And this is that pluralistic, this integrationist mindset. And so as Christians, we believe in the sufficiency of Scripture and that we don't need to integrate biblical the world psychology into our biblical worldview. And so instead, we're going to try to critically look at it and recast these categories into a biblical worldview. What is the way the Bible talks about self-esteem? And so the world, they elevate personal experience. They're like, whenever you hear them talking about wisdom, it's always like, well, in my experience, I feel this or I observe this, therefore, here's what you should do about it. That's worldly wisdom. Biblical wisdom, on the other hand, goes to the Bible and looks at principles for what it teaches. It has you build a biblical worldview about it. You understand true theology about God and man, and then you use those principles to understand the world and human experience. And so you evaluate human experience based on the Bible. You don't use human experience to sort of reinterpret the Bible in a way that makes sense to you. And so here's the solution. Here's the right biblical category. I should have asked a question, but first, before getting into this, is like, what does the Bible tell you to esteem? The Bible tells you to esteem God, right? Who should you look up to? It's God. He's the one that you should be esteeming. It's not about yourself either way. And so you see a common denominator with the low and high self-esteem. I'm the worst, I'm the best. The common denominator is I am. It's sort of a self-focus. And so both of those things are actually forms of pride. So high self-esteem, that's more obviously a form of pride, and the Bible talks against boasting. But a low self-esteem is also a form of pride because, again, it's a self-focus. And sometimes it can be false humility. Sometimes it can be trying to get attention from people. Sometimes it can be just sort of an ungratefulness for the place that God has put you in and the abilities he's given you. And so having a low self-esteem of like feeling in the dumps, both of those things are actually forms of pride. And what you should instead do, and this is something that, especially as teens, you start getting this self-awareness and worrying about what other people think of you. And that's not going to go away as an adult, but it's probably heightened as a teen. And generally speaking, people probably aren't thinking about you all that much. And generally speaking, you should be thinking about God or thinking about others, not thinking about yourself or worrying about what other people think of you. You should instead fear God and see him as the person that you're living before primarily. And so when you recast these categories and you look at it from a biblical perspective, it gives you a different solution. This isn't a solution that the world will necessarily come up with, but it's a solution that the Bible gives us and is the true one. And so think less about yourself, more about God. And when you're feeling in the dumps or when you're feeling extra boastful, you can remember your identity that we just looked at, which is one, you're made from the dust. There's nothing in you that is amazing and great apart from what God has given you. It's all a gift from God. So there's no reason to boast. And also, you're an image bearer. So even if you mess up, even if you fail, like you can remember that you're still made in the image of God. There's still value there. Again, not because you're amazing, but because of how God made you. And so, does that make sense? Any questions on that? So again, I think that's a helpful thing to understand how to deal with self-esteem. But just also remember this: there are going to be dozens of things like this where you're going to have to recast into biblical categories. And so we want to look now more at our identity. And so who are you? There are different ways of defining yourself. And so some ways people may define themselves or find identity and security in is maybe your athletic or academic performance. And this could be, again, positive or negative. You may be like, I'm great at school, and you work really hard because this is who you are. Or you may feel like I suck at school and I'm actually just an athlete. I'm not an academic, I'm an athlete. You can find your identity in various hobbies and interests that you have. It could be in your appearance or dress. You dress a certain way, maybe, and that makes you different from others. And you see your identity in how you appear to others. Could be various things about your personality or character traits. Could be your family and friends and your social circle. And how you define yourself really shows what you value most. And so what we want to be the foundation of our identity is the fact that we are made as the image of God. And so let's dig into that. So this is back in Genesis 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So the heart of how God made us is in his image and according to his likeness. So those two things kind of explain our nature and how we're made. And so this verse stands out through the rest of Genesis 1, that it kind of slows down and God takes his time and even deliberates about how he's going to make man. So it's seen as being very special. It's a climax of God's creation in Genesis 1. So I want to ask you this question. What is an image? What is an image?
A picture?
A picture, yeah. What is a picture?
Something that depicts something else that's real.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's great. So I brought this sort of maybe a simple, silly illustration. I have an apple here. There's a real apple, obviously. And then I have a picture of that apple that I took. So this is an image. So the important thing is kind of what you said there is, how much of an apple is this? Is this 10% of an apple? 1% of an apple?
You know what it looks like an apple.
Yeah, it's 0% of an apple, right? So when we talk about being made in the image of God, it's important to understand, like, we are not, in any sense, we have 0% godness in it. Sometimes people will use language like, you have the spark of God in you, and that's saying it's like you got a little bit of godness in you, a little bit of that spark, but that is heresy. So that's not what we're saying. So we're made in the likeness of God. You can kind of see it looks like an apple, right? But it is not actually an apple. So that's one important thing to remember with being made in the image of God, is it's a copy of the original. It's not the actual original real deal. And so we're like God in certain ways, and we're going to cover what that means, but we don't have godness in us. And also, we'll look at this a little bit closer, but we don't just have a little bit of the image in us somewhere, like some part of us contains the image, that we are the image of God. There's something about the totality of us that is the image of God. It's not just a little piece of us tucked away somewhere. And so to kind of explain a little bit more what this image means, we actually have to see the purpose of the image. So the homework question from last week was this: what is the work God called mankind to? So what are some answers? Okay, Shannon?
To watch over the animals in the land.
Okay, to watch over. Good. That's part of it. What else?
Name the animals.
Okay.
Similar to Sharon's point, to subdue the earth and keep it.
Yep.
Have dominion over the world.
Right, yeah. So the very first thing that is mentioned right after talking about being made in the image is to have dominion. And then from that are things like subduing and multiplying, the authority, like Adam naming animals is sort of an act of authority. And so that's part of having dominion. Mentioned like caring for the animals, that's part of it as well. It all kind of flows from that language of dominion. And so people will call that the dominion mandate sometimes. And that's what we see. So verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So not all translations have this so that, but a few translations do, because there is a clear connection in the way that the grammar is, at least according to all the commentators I read, that show that this having dominion is a result or a purpose of man being made in the image of God according to his likeness. So we are made in the image of God so that we can have dominion over the world. And the idea there is just that we are God's rulers over the world. It's actually language of royalty. It's language of kings, to have dominion, to have rulership. And so how the kind of the foundation or core aspect of being made in the image of God is that we are representatives of God. So God is Lord over heaven and earth. He's King of Kings, Lord of Lords. And he made man to be his co-rulers on earth. So this is sometimes language that you don't see people talking about as much throughout the rest of the Bible, but in the beginning of the Bible and at the end as well, you really see this language of royalty for man to be God's co-rulers or co-regents over the world. So here's some examples of that, about how we represent God. So the other time images is used in the Old Testament, it is about idols. And so idols are images that represent other deities, right? So like we talked about the Enuma Elish, I think one of the gods was Tiamat, who represented the ocean. And so if you were to create an idol of Tiamat, it would have been somehow related to the ocean. And so idols are images that represent deities. And that was a very common understanding, and that's what people would have thought of often when they heard the term images. So that's one of the reasons why it's wrong to create images of God, like in the Ten Commandments. It's because God already created an image for him on earth, and it was man. And those other images fall short, and often the reason they fall short is because they're dead, they're wood. Man, on the other hand, is a living image. And that's the only reason we can represent God. Another example is kings would often send their image throughout their kingdom. So, for example, with the Roman Empire, you see like the bust of the emperors, they were distributed throughout other parts of their kingdom. And what's interesting is you don't actually see those busts in Rome as much because you had the actual real thing there. You had the emperor. But he would send that out to the rest of his kingdom because it was to show like, who is your ruler? Your ruler is the emperor. Here's his image. And so it was a way of exercising dominion across the kingdom. And so that's what God made man as, is us being made in his image, is us being his representatives on earth to make his lordship and his glory known throughout the world. And so we are ambassadors made to rule over the world and fulfill God's purposes. So as we get into the image of God, here are kind of the three things we're going to look at. So the first thing is you represent God. Second, you resemble God. There's that language of likeness. And then you reflect God's glory. So an image, this kind of is a little faded, doesn't quite reflect the glory of the apple. But a good image is properly going to reflect the glory of the original. And so digging into some of the implications of this, you represent God on earth. So take dominion and subdue the earth and align yourself with God's purposes. And you resemble God. So being made in his likeness has certain implications for your nature. You have certain capacities, certain abilities, including the ability to make choices and be a moral being that is unique to man. And because you're made like God, and because you represent him, you can be in a relationship with him, and you're designed to be in a relationship with God and man. And you reflect God's glory. So you should be holy as he is holy, and worship God. So let's dig into this a little bit about the idea of taking dominion. So let us make man in our image according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion. And you see over the fish of the sea, over the birds, over the cattle, and over all the earth. So it wasn't limited to just animals. It's over all of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So by the way, this isn't something that is just for men. This is actually given to both men and women, are to have dominion over the earth. And they're blessed. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, bring it under, that language of subdue again is language of rulership. It's to bring it under subjection, under your rule, and have dominion over the fish, over the bird, every living thing. And so when we look at this idea of taking dominion, God made us to develop and cultivate the world. And you see that the start of that in Genesis when he gives him the command to keep and cultivate the garden. And so when we talk about subduing animals, one of the things that would have involved was bringing the animals under subjection to use them as tools for agriculture and other labor. And actually you see in Genesis, in the same Toledo, that inventors get a shout out. And I think part of the reason they get a shout out in Genesis 4 is the fact that it kind of is showing them taking dominion in certain ways of the earth. And so here's some examples in Genesis 4. And Adah gave birth to Jabal, who was the father of those who live in tents and have livestock. So the father of, so he's saying he like started this, he invented this, he got this going. And he was the father of those who have livestock. What's significant about that? What does it mean to have livestock? And what happened? How were things before that?
Bringing around livestock to trade, to eat, to
Yeah.
basically thrive.
Yeah, and they lived in tents, so they sort of like took their livestock around different areas. They were the first ones to do that. And what you're seeing here is the animals are being domesticated. So before this, it would have been wild animals. Jabal gets a shout out because he was the first one to actually domesticate the animals and make them livestock. And his brother's name was Jubal, and he was the father of all who play the lyre and the pipe, so music and culture. So that's developing of those things is part of the Dominion mandate. And Zillah also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. So of course, especially that after the curse, when they were they had to cultivate the ground and work was much more laborious, it would have been a big deal to create implements, tools, is essentially technology for doing their work. And so Tubal-Cain was the first one to build these tools and these technologies. So Christians can and should creatively leverage technology. And part of your job as a human is to be effective in the world and to be able to build and create things. And that should have an effect about how you go about everything you do in certain ways. And so what we also see is sort of flowing from this is that God made us to work. So work glorifies God and aligns with the way God made you. So Genesis 2:15, and Yahweh took the man and set him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. He had a job. He was to cultivate, to grow, to build up this garden and to maintain it. And then somebody mentioned naming the animals. That's a big part of it as well. So he had authority over the animals. Another passage from the New Testament: whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men. So you shouldn't see work as being a necessary evil. I sometimes see this where it's like, well, there's certain things that really matter. Work is just, I just do it to feed my family, do the bare minimum, get by. Like that's not the way the Bible sees work. The Bible sees work as being good and something you should find good in. And if you buck this, if you try to avoid work as much as possible, and we live in a day and age where it's probably one of the first times it's actually possible to try to just like live off the government, that never used to be the case. But if you do that, you're gonna at least, I think, depression and anxiety. Like it's just not the way you're made. You're made to work, and as you work hard, you can actually enjoy the fruits of your labors. So we'll look at this passage in Ecclesiastes. Here's what I have seen to be good, which is beautiful: to eat and drink, and to see good in all one's labor, in which he labors under the sun during the few days of his life, which God has given him, for this is his portion. And throughout Ecclesiastes, it has, and even in the context here, it has a negative view of workaholics, that their work as sort of their identity and as the thing that matters most, and then they become miserly old rich people that just try to scroll away their wealth and never actually do anything with it. So it has a negative view of labor for labor's sake. But what it is saying is that you can, as you work, actually enjoy it, and you should enjoy the fruits of your labor. Verse 19, furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he's also empowered him to eat from them and take up his portion and be glad in his labor. It's a gift from God. Working is a gift from God. So oftentimes you probably heard the saying, find something that you love, do what you love with work. And that has led to many, many useless degrees where people try to find a job in something they love, but nobody actually needs that or wants to hire them for that. And the Bible has a little bit different view. It's not so much saying go find work that you love, and it's saying like whatever you're doing, the work you're given, find joy in it, find gladness in it, view it as good. You're much better off trying to be glad in your work than trying to just keep chasing something new until you find something that you enjoy. You can find joy in your work. Also, God made us to multiply. So it's hard to ignore this as being a part of the dominion mandate. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. So part of that's just having family, having kids. I could only imagine they lived to be hundreds of years old. Adam and Eve probably had a whole bunch of kids. And And the culture can sometimes discourage this, but the Bible views family and kids as very positively and something that you should is fine to look for. That being said, there are a lot of caveats, which I can't necessarily get into all of them, but not everyone will have biological kids. You see many faithful Christians that are single. What are some examples of people that are single in the Bible? Paul, yeah. Who else? So Jesus was, right? So Jesus was single. Paul, like you can be single, and Paul talks about it, how if you're single for the purpose of being able to serve God better, that's great. And if you know you don't get married and nobody comes along, like you can still find, you're still made in the image of God. You can still find purpose in life and serving God. But want to make those caveats without also diminishing the fact that family is good. And God made us to steward. So what is a steward? Tell me what a steward is. Jason?
Kind of like a worker, almost like like taking care of something that they've left you in charge of.
Yep. That's great. So there's an owner, right? And he's left you in charge of it, and you're to take care of it for the owner's benefit, right? It's not like you don't own it. So people talk about that, like how much money do you own? Like in one sense, zero, because it's all God's, right? And you're merely a steward of what God has given you. However, we want to view this stewardship as not just being a maintainer, just kind of keeping things going, making sure it doesn't, nothing bad happens. The Bible has a bigger view of stewardship. And so my definition of stewardship is taking ownership for the actual owner's benefit. And so we don't want to diminish the fact that it's all God's. At the same time, if God's giving you something to take care of, you shouldn't just do the bare minimum. Like your mindset should be this idea of taking ownership. You should own it. Again, I say that understanding that you don't actually own it, but I think it's some of the best language to describe what it means to be a good steward. And so we'll look at an example of this with Joseph. So Joseph, he was sold into slavery, and the place he was sold into, the household he was sold into slavery at, he ended up ruling the whole household. He owned it so much that the actual owner was like, "You just take care of everything. Like I know you'll do a better job than me." Like that is what a good steward does. And then when he became a prisoner, he basically the prisoner ran the prison, right? So these are examples of. It's not the main point of the story. So as we get to the story of Joseph, we'll see what the main point is. But I do think you see an example in Joseph how a good steward actually takes ownership and drives things forward. He doesn't just try to like maintain and keep it steady. And so the implication for this for you is wherever you are and whatever you're doing, own it and work hard for the glory of God. So especially as teens, it's tempting to kind of want to just jump to the next stage, just want to try to like just get to being an adult, act like an adult. That's not necessarily good. Like what instead it's good to prepare for those things, but what instead your mindset should be is whatever God has given you, be content wherever he's placed you, whatever position, and own it and do the best with it that you can for the glory of God. Because if you have this mindset of like never being happy with maybe the age you are or where you're at, and always trying to get to the next thing, like you'll never be satisfied. As soon as you get that next thing, you'll just want maybe it's like I just want to be an adult and get a job. Well, you'll be an adult and you'll get a job, and it's like, well, I just want something a little bit better. You'll always be unsatisfied. You'll always be chasing this next thing. And really, the best way to prepare for the next stage is to do well in the one you're at. And so, if that's school or work, I know, like if you can't even do your own schoolwork or your homework, if you can't take responsibility for whatever God's given you, like you're not ready to go to that next stage. So if you're in school, or even if you do have a job, like do the best of it. Take that dominion mindset, try to develop, cultivate, and build things. If you're a son and a daughter, or you have a brother or sister, like own that and try to do it for the glory of God. Don't wish for something else. With church, come to church. Try to listen, engage, pay attention, try to grow, understand how things apply to you. Right? Your social life. Right? It's not just for fun. Like you want to actually develop and grow. Everything, and then eventually, like if you're married, if you're a husband and a wife, a mother, a father, like you should own that and do it to the best of your ability and work hard at it for the glory of God. So we're gonna skip through some things. So one thing you just want to mention too, the foundation. I think the foundation of being made in the image of God is that idea of your position. You represent God, but it also means you're made in His likeness, and so you have sort of unique capacities. You speak because God is a speaking God. You can reason and think because God is rational and orderly. You see and hear because God is a seeing and hearing God, and you're a moral being. So you see even in chapter 2 how He placed the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so they're a moral being. That's something that animals aren't. And then an image, it reflects the glory of God. So you're made to worship God. So part of being made in the image means you are a worshiping being. What does it mean to worship? Anybody give me a definition of worship?
To praise something as it is the center of like what you believe.
Okay, yeah. So to pray, like praise. When you're praising, you're ascribing worth. So it's like worship. Worth is part of that word. It's seeing something as being the most valuable, the most important thing. And a big part of that is seeing God for His greatness and His goodness. So God's glory, it's connected to His character, His attributes, who He is. And you are made to worship God with all of your life. So you represent God. You're His ambassadors in the world with the goal of making His worship known. You resemble God. You're made in His likeness, and you reflect His glory. You're made to glorify God. That's a purpose for everything. You can do those other things. You can try to, again, like work hard, be a good steward. But if you're not doing it for God's glory, then you're missing the point. So let me ask this question. Did mankind lose the image of God? So Adam fell into sin. Did he lose it? You're shaking your head no? No? Yeah, I think you're right. We didn't lose it, but did something happen in the image? You think so, Luke?
Yeah, something happened. Because mankind was thought to be something else than what God had given them to.
Right. So the image was scarred. So all humans were still made in the image of God. You see this in Genesis. The reason it's wrong to murder is because man is made in the image of God. That's why, like our laws, our U.S. laws and many laws reflect this. But like, let's say someone steals your stuff. Are you allowed to shoot them in self-defense because they stole your stuff? No, that's murder. You're only allowed. Self-defense is only for defending yourself from bodily harm or someone else from death, right? Those kind of things. The reason for that is property, things don't matter, right? What matters most is humans. Humans have much more worth and value because they're made in the image of God. And you see later with James, it talks about how you shouldn't curse people because they're made in the likeness of God. So it's a foundation, even still, for all kinds of human dignity, regardless of ethnicity. That's why racism is wrong, because all people are made in the image of God. Whether you're male or female, whatever your age is, even if you're unborn in the mother's womb, wherever you live, your status in life, your background, doesn't matter who you are, you have dignity and worth because you are made in the image of God. And so humans are still made in the image of God, but it was scarred and disfigured. Even certain capacities like reason, like sin makes you dumb. And so certain things fell back. And of course, ultimately, if we're to reflect God's glory, we're to be holy like He is holy. And the fall cause that part of the image to be scarred. But the image can be renewed in Christ and through sanctification. So you really start seeing that theme picked up again in the New Testament. So people can put on a new man who's renewed in the knowledge according to the image of the one who created him. So their sanctification is being made more like God, being made more like Christ, who is the perfect image, the exact replica, not like this image. He's an exact replica. He's the very nature of God. He shows us who God is. And so the more we're made like Christ, the more we become, the more we're in the likeness of God. And then one day it'll be perfected in the image of Christ, so that when we see him, when we see him in his perfection, we'll become like him. So the image continues, and it can be renewed, and one day it will be perfected in Christians. And the main danger, so sort of the alternative to all this is idols. And so idols are anything that you worship in place of God. And sometimes I think we think about idols in the Old Testament as being maybe different than idols now. And there are differences, but there's a lot of similarities as well. So idols back in that day, they represented deities. So they didn't think that piece of wood was actually the deity itself, right? They saw it as representing a deity. But those deities represented something they wanted, right? So why might somebody worship, I don't know what God it could have been, but the God who brings rain? Why would somebody worship that God? You think?
Because they want rain to come.
Yeah, why do they want the rain to come?
For their watering their crops.
Right. Yeah. So they wanted food, right?
They want personal benefit from their own God.
Yeah, they want a personal benefit. And so if you worship it, you might give a sacrifice to the God of war before going into battle, because you wanted to win the battle, right? So the idols, they represented things they wanted, in a sense, and they worshiped them because they worshiped the thing they wanted. And so that's the same today. Like you all, Calvin talks about how people are an idol factory. You're constantly creating new things to worship. So whatever you want, whatever you're willing to, maybe just get angry for, maybe you're depressed if you don't get it, whatever you see as being the most important thing that you want, that could be an idol for you. And sometimes it's even good things can be idols. So just as people back in that day were looking for things, they wanted certain things, same today, you can want something more than God and not be satisfied in God. And that is an idol. And so ultimately, we should see our relationship to God as being the most important thing. So Jeremiah 9. Thus says Yahweh, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, let not the mighty man boast in his might, let not the rich man boast in his riches. So you kind of see those different like identities almost, different people, someone that might see themselves as being wise and boasting that they're wise or mighty or rich. That's not the things that we should boast in as humans made in the image of God. Instead, let him who boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am Yahweh who shows loving kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. For I delight in these things, declares Yahweh. So what you should boast in and talk about and be most thankful for and see as being the most important thing in your life is the fact that you have a relationship with God if you've actually turned from your sin and trusted in Christ as a Savior. Like when you do that, you can, just as with Adam, there was a break in the relationship and reconciliation was needed, like you can have a relationship with God because you're made in the image of God. And that is the most important thing. So we'll pray and then we'll look over some of the homework for next week. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word that shows us who we are. I just pray that all of us here would see our identity in God, in Christ, and see our need of a Savior, and that if we come to Christ for forgiveness and justification, to be made right, to be restored to God, and we can have a relationship with Him, and our identity to be in God, which is the most secure, the most important thing that matters for eternity. Thank you for your word that shows that you are a great and amazing God that we can trust. In Christ's name. Amen. Homework for next week. So one thing is, I don't know if you saw, we sent out a form that you can submit a question. So on March 8th, we're going to, Jason and I will have a Q&A. So we'll answer any questions that you may have. And that could be questions from the various lessons, but really questions about anything. So if you didn't get this form, you can ask your parents for it, and you can submit questions. And there's a link. So we also send an email for it. And then for next week, the lesson on marriage, here's your homework. If you could read Genesis 1:26 through 2:25 and answer the question, what are God's purposes for marriage? So you are dismissed.